Welcome into an edition of both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Bills. I'm Kevin Oesrtreicher, the host of Locked On Ravens. Here with me is Joe Marino, the host of Locked On Bills. Thank you so much for making both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Bills your first listen of the day. We are free and available on all platforms. That includes over on YouTube as well. And today's episode of both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Bills is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. Pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less than their PrizePicks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on your entry. First-time users can receive 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. That's PrizePicks.com, promo code LOCKEDON. And Joe, this is a game I've been looking forward to ever since the schedule came out. Week 4, Ravens-Bills. Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen. I mean, these are two of the best quarterbacks in this league. We get to see them face off 1 o'clock on CBS. I have a feeling, Joe, this could be the game of the week.
Yeah, I think it's the one most people want to watch. You know, two of the best quarterbacks in the league, two contenders in the AFC. A lot on the line, right? You start to think way ahead to tiebreakers and the playoff standings. All of that's going to be at stake on Sunday. And so even if I weren't covering this game, this would be the one I'd want to see if I was an NFL fan.
And there are so many you can choose from, but I do think that with the electricity both these teams have, the 2-1 starts, both common denominators have lost to Miami. The Ravens in week 2, the Bills in week 3, and I know it stings a little for Bill. I wish the Ravens could have helped the Bills out a little bit with a win against Miami, but it's what happens sometimes. But I think when you're talking about biggest storylines for this game, Joe, I think for both teams and for the Ravens, I'll start it off, it comes down to some health. And I know that for the Ravens, they suffered multiple injuries in week 3, and a couple of big contributors, all things considered. Michael Pierce, it was announced that, there's a bicep injury, a bicep tear for him, and he's going to have to determine whether he wants to have pretty much season-ending surgery or play through the pain. The decision hasn't been made on that yet, but he's been playing really well for them. That's a big loss to the defensive line room. And I think when you're talking about the offensive line for Baltimore, they've been consistent at 4 or 5 positions. The one that's been iffy this year has been left tackle. The injury to Ronnie Stanley in 2020, he's still not back from. Played 1 game in 2021. He wasn't where he wanted to be, opted for a second surgery. He's played 1 game since the middle of 2020. Then they lose Juwan James in week 1 to a torn Achilles. Patrick McCary goes down with an ankle sprain in week 3. So in comes rookie Daniel Faalele out of Minnesota, who had never played left tackle before, was only a right tackle in Minnesota. All things considered, I'd say held his own. Now, Stanley, apparently he is going to be back on the field sooner rather than later. We have kind of heard that over the past couple of weeks, so who knows if he's going to play. But also, in their secondary, they've been dealing with some stuff. Brandon Stevens was able to return last week, but maybe wasn't all the way fully back. Marcus Peters is getting fully back after missing all the 2021 season thing. Same thing with J.K. Dobbins. But for Baltimore, they're looking to, again, get some of those guys back and figure out just where they are health-wise, because they have been struck again by the injury bug. Maybe not as bad as last year, but the depth, the outside linebacker depth. They signed Jason Pierre-Paul after losing Stephen Means to a torn Achilles. Justin Houston goes down with a groin injury. It's injuries all over the place for the Ravens, Joe, and I know for Buffalo, they're having some stuff too in their secondary.
Yeah, Kevin, and I sort of feel bad talking about injuries because I know Baltimore literally lost a season last year because of injuries. Let's face it, Baltimore is a contender in the AFC. We know what this team is under Coach Harbaugh and with Lamar Jackson, and obviously injuries were just too much for any team last year. The Bills are part of the injury club now, and they've been really healthy for the last several years, and I guess all that good luck over the last several years has finally caught up to them. And unfortunately, the biggest storyline for Buffalo is who do they get back this week? You look in the secondary, like you mentioned, does Jordan Poyer play, an all-pro safety? Dane Jackson, left the field in an ambulance against Tennessee. Practice limited already this week. Can he go on Sunday? Their other corner, Christian Benford, fractured hand. Obviously, I don't think he's going to play. So who do you have in the secondary? And then who do you have up front on the defensive line? It doesn't sound like Jordan Phillips is going to be able to go. Ed Oliver with some type of ankle injury, is he back and able to play? And so it's not just the secondary, it's that defensive line as well, where half of your rotation right now is banged up. And then you shift over to the offensive side of the football, and on the offensive line, the Bills have a couple of injuries. Mitch Morse missed last week with an elbow. He's their starting center. Ryan Bates, their starting right guard, is in concussion protocol. So could you potentially be without a couple of starters on your offensive line, a couple of very important players, you starter in Oliver and a guy who plays a ton in Phillips on your defensive line, and how much of your secondary can actually play? Those are big question marks for the Bills heading into this weekend. And obviously a shorthanded game last week against Miami where the Bills were absolutely in position to win that game very, very convincingly. But just as it went on, a lot of attrition in terms of more injuries piling up. And so we're sitting here in the middle of the week getting ready for this game on Sunday, really kind of wondering who's going to be available to play against Baltimore.
And it can have an impact, obviously, on the field because you have two teams that have, I think, built their rosters very well. A hole here and there when fully healthy, but you can't pick every single thing to look at, especially when you have guys on huge contracts like both Buffalo and Baltimore do. But I think, Joe, when looking on the field for the Ravens, a big part of some of their early season struggles have been on the defensive side of the ball. And in terms of yards per attempt, averaging what this Ravens defense has, they are 30th in the league in pass yards per attempt given up at 7.2. They're 26th in the league in yards per attempt given up on the ground at 5.0. So while they've been a great turnover defense this year, they're already halfway to their 2021 total through 3 games. They're 2/3 of their 2021 interception total through 3 games. Adding Marcus Williams has been a godsend to the secondary. He's a single high guy, can roam around the field. He's been amazing for them. But we've seen the Ravens get gashed on the ground, which is pretty uncharacteristic. While Baltimore's secondary was bottom 5 in plenty of categories last year because of the injuries they went through, the run defense was a top unit. This year, the secondary is struggling a little bit. The run defense is struggling a little bit, and that has turned into some gashing plays where teams are able to. I mean, Devontae Parker averaged over 30 yards a catch last week. It was rough for the Ravens, and big plays have been an issue for them, miscommunications. Now, I think the timely turnovers have been kind of that saving grace for them. But against a team with Josh Allen and Stefon Diggs and the firepower this Bills offense has, you can't allow those miscues because we saw against the high-powered offense in Miami, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, you give up big plays to those guys. One play can change a game, and Baltimore had about 3 or 4 of them in week 2. Against Buffalo, it can be the same thing, especially with that talent.
Kevin, if I were to take an on-field storyline for the Bills, and it's nice to kind of focus back on that angle, I would say it is this Bills rushing offense and what type of life can they show? You mentioned some of the issues that the Ravens have had. I think they're giving up 5 yards a carry this year so far. That's against the Dolphins, Jets, and Patriots. So those aren't necessarily teams that you look at and say, great running backs, great situation to run the football. Well, the Bills are a lot like the Ravens so far this year in that Lamar Jackson is accounting for so much of that Baltimore offense, just like Josh Allen's accounting for, I think, 83% of the Bills' offensive yards. And we know that has to change, right? We could both acknowledge that. And for the Bills, can that start to shift this week? A lot of new pieces on the offensive line, new offensive line coach, and Aaron Kromer. There's a lot of hope for what this run scheme could look like. But so far, it really hasn't come together. They haven't been able to be consistent with their run blocking. None of the running backs have gotten going at all. And so I think it's going to be interesting, especially if we get some weather for this game. I don't know what type of rain could be in the forecast with, the kind of the hurricane coming through and what implications there's going to be on Baltimore. But this could come down to needing to run the football against Baltimore. And if the Bills are going to have success on Sunday, and that's going to be part of the recipe, it's got to come to life.
Yeah, and it is so interesting. You mentioned Josh Allen, 83%. Lamar Jackson for Baltimore, 86% of the offense. So you have two guys who are quite literally the offenses, the Ravens run game. We know how dominant it was in 2019, the back half of the 2020 season, but they are missing guys like a fully healthy J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, Ronnie Stanley. And so they bring in veterans. Last year, it was the Latavius Murrays of the world, the Le'Veon Bells, the Devonta Freeman. That's an all-pro team in like 2015, but it was 2021. This year, it's Mike Davis and Kenyon Drake. I mean, in week 2, Mike Davis had 5 carries for 4 yards. Mark Andrews out yards per carried him as a tight end. So it's been Lamar Jackson is the run game. Lamar Jackson is the pass game. And against the Buffalo defense that despite all the injuries in the secondary, their front 7 is extremely good. Von Miller coming off the edge. You have to figure out how you're going to stop him if Ronnie Stanley isn't able to go. And if it's Falele, again, his first career start, it would be at left tackle. He's been working there. It's going to be interesting to see how the Ravens offense can go up against that Buffalo defense because they've proven that they have the talent. They've gone out there and they've had some really, really good performances so far this season. But coming up here on this edition of both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Bills, talk about key matchups that can win the game for each team. So be sure to stay tuned. We still have a ton to talk about here on the shows.
BetOnline.net is your number one source for football betting information this season. You can find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game you can find. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sports wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. It's the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf. So head to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more. It's BetOnline, and it's where the game starts.
We're back here with our second segment of this crossover Thursday edition. Locked on Ravens, Locked on Bills. Kevin Oesrtreicher, Locked on Ravens, here with Joe Marino of Locked on Bills. And Joe, when we're talking about key matchups, I know that, look, these two guys aren't playing on the field at the same time as Lamar Jackson going out there and tackling Josh Allen on the field. But one of these guys is going to have to outplay the other if their team wants to win the game. And something I love about this rivalry, if you can call it that, it's not really a rivalry between those two. Those two have a lot of love for each other. They both supported each other in the media, on the field, off the field. We've seen it throughout the week, this week so far. You know, Josh Allen saying Lamar Jackson should be the highest paid player in the league. You know, Lamar Jackson saying he appreciates it. And, you know, he's talked about Josh Allen in a very high light before. We see the two guys in the divisional round in 2021 before the game talking and chatting it up. These two guys have a ton of respect for each other. I have a ton of respect for both guys too. But I think when you're talking about defenses that, you know, injury-wise, where are they going to be at when we're talking after Sunday at 1 p.m., both of them have been the respective offenses for their teams. Both of them have weapons. You know, Josh Allen, number one guy, Stefon Diggs, Lamar Jackson with Mark Andrews, two very talented players. Both those guys are going to have to put the teams on their back, and hopefully some of the guys can step up. Obviously, it can't be all Josh Allen or all Lamar Jackson, but those two, when you're talking about why did one team win or why did one team lose, I think it might come down to Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right about that, which makes me very interested in how these defenses are going to play against these quarterbacks and kind of lasering in on my thoughts about the Bills defense against Lamar Jackson. Lamar has really overcome some of the stuff that came up last year with beating the blitz, right? After that Miami game, a lot of teams wanted to blitz and see if he can beat it. And maybe there were some issues last year. Well, there's no issues this year. This guy's got the number one passer rating in the NFL when blitzed. I mean, he's completing 81% of his passes, 11.5 yards per attempt, and a passer rating of 154.2. That's damn near perfect when facing the blitz. Now, what I like from the Bills' perspective here is the Bills don't blitz. That's not part of what they need. That's not part of their formula. They are a rush 4, drop 7 defense. And so I think that somewhat plays into the strengths where other teams have had to blitz to manufacture pressure because they don't have their rushers up front. Buffalo isn't going to fall into that category. Now, Lamar Jackson, another metric about him that really stands out is his average time to throw, 3.18 seconds. That's 31st in the NFL, and he doesn't get the ball out, or he does get the ball out in over 2.5 seconds on 60% of his dropbacks. Under those circumstances, he holds it for 4.09 seconds. Lamar Jackson puts so much stress in your defense because not only do you have to cover for longer, and he's pushing the ball down the field a lot more than he really ever has. I mean, he's one of the furthest average depth of target quarterback so far this year. The deep ball is something that he's definitely wanting to implement more of this year. And so you have to cover for longer. You have to cover for deeper. And oh, by the way, he's one of the most talented 3, 4, 5 guys in the league with the ball in his hand. So he can obviously do a lot with his legs. Ravens fans know that this guy puts maximum stress on a defense. And so how do you counter that? Well, I think you have to, of course, contain rush, which I'm sure you hear about every single week on these crossover discussions. You got to contain rush Lamar Jackson and drop 7. The good news for the Bills is that's kind of what they do. Now, easier said than done. Lamar Jackson's going to make his plays. But for me, how this Bills defense plays against Lamar is obviously going to be critical. And the Bills had some success against Lamar. You go back to the playoff game and even the game that Baltimore won back in 2019, it wasn't Lamar's best day. And so I'm interested to see the evolution here, right? Because I think Lamar's a player that just continues to evolve and continues to answer every critical question about him. And what does it look like against this Bills defense that's had some level of success against him to this point and stylistically doesn't have to change much in terms of their core principles of playing the game. And so big task at hand. And how they handle that is going to be really critical. And I'm kind of interested, Kevin, in some of these ancillary components of the offense. We know about Mark Andrews and Rashad Bateman. Those guys are going to get the ball. They're going to make their plays. But from the Devin Duvernays and Isaiah Likeleys of the world, who steps up? The Demarcus Robinsons. Can those guys become more of an answer for them this week? I think that's another big storyline from a Bills defense perspective against this Baltimore offense that I'm going to be dialed into.
Yeah, I think it's a huge one too. When you mentioned Devin Duvernay, he has been, I think, the perfect version so far of what the Ravens wanted out of these young receivers after they traded away Marquise Brown. There were a lot of questions, especially after the Ravens didn't address the position in the draft after trading away Brown. They take Tyler Linderbaum in the late first round instead of maybe a wide receiver there, and they take 2 tight ends. They don't even take a wide receiver. That they had 11 picks. They didn't take one wide receiver. They bring in, you mentioned Demarcus Robinson. He was really their only addition. They were hoping that guys like Devin Duvernay, James Prochet, Tylan Wallace would step up. And so far, we haven't seen a ton from Prochet and Wallace, but Duvernay has been electric. He big playability so far.
He had the stuff too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He's one. I think he's the best returner in the NFL. And there are some names you could put up there with him, but he's been phenomenal for them in that aspect. And we saw it's not just the big play stuff where he can get free and get open for a long game, but he's making contested catches, toe tap catches in the end zone. He is turning in to this all-around receiver and someone who Lamar Jackson trusts. And that's big for me because the Ravens drafted Miles Boykin in the 3rd round of 2019. And they really never were able to get on the same page with each other. Sometimes Miles Boykin would be run blocking and Jackson's airing the ball out to him. And they never got on the same page. And while Devin Duvernay is not necessarily this big-bodied target, he's going up there and playing like he's a big-bodied target. And that's what they needed. When the Ravens drafted Boykin, they expected him to, play to his size, and he had a ton of speed there too, but he never really played to his size. He's a big guy, but he never really played like it. Duvernay's playing big, he's playing confident, and that's a big thing. The Ravens are also getting guys like Isaiah Likely involved. Josh Oliver catches his first career touchdown against the Patriots in week 3. Demarcus Robinson made a couple of nice plays too, but it really has been, the Mark Andrews show. Rashad Bateman only has 8 catches on the year. He leads the league in yards per catch at around 28.3. So he's been their big play guy, but he has been able to release off the line effectively, break ankles yards after the catch wise. He is someone with the ball in space. He does damage and has that deceptive speed as well, which I know people, again, we're talking about, can the Ravens replace that speed that Marquise Brown had? And can they have that big playability? Who's going to step up? So far, it has been Bateman. It has been Duvernay. And for Andrews, again, we all know what he can do. He's playing like the best tight end in the league again this year after doing it in 2021. So I've been really, really impressed. But Joe, you stole my question because I was going to ask you, we know about Stefon Diggs, right? But obviously there are players on the offense who have contributed this year, like Gabe Davis, and obviously there are others as well. You talk about some of the running backs, but who has to step up on that Bills offense? Because while the Josh Allen to Stefon Diggs connection is incredible, it can't just be them for 60 minutes.
Yeah, and I would agree with you. And you got Marlon Humphrey on that defense. You got Marcus Peters on that defense. I think you want to look at the guy that those players aren't covering, right? That's going to be probably your best matchup in Baltimore. Probably going to be playing some young players, whether that's Demarion Williams or Jalen Armour Davis or Brandon, whoever, right? Like whoever that other guy's going to be on Sunday. That might be a matchup where the Bills have some advantages. And so you mentioned Diggs, but Gabriel Davis is kind of expected to break out this year. He had an ankle injury that kept him out of week 2, and he played through it last week. How healthy is he this week, and can he really be a 8-10 target guy in this game? You look at Isaiah Mckenzie, who the Bills have had for a while, and his role just kind of expands every single year. And one of their primary answers in the slot now that Cole Beasley's no longer around, and another veteran in Jamison Crowder. With the Jets in Washington for a while there. He also has a role for this football team as kind of another slot player. And the Bills have incorporated a lot more 2-back stuff and a lot more 2 tight end stuff. So you're going to see guys like a Reggie Gilliam and being creative with James Cook, a 2nd-round pick out of Georgia, maybe giving him some opportunities to catch a football in space, which happened more against Miami last week. And you kind of think about that being a layer to the offense moving forward. So with the new play caller in Ken Dorsey this year, there's been a lot of different personnel groupings and packages and evolution even, through 3 weeks. And so obviously Baltimore is very stylistically different than what they faced over the last few years few weeks in terms of what they present in terms of challenges on defense. And so I think you're going to see just continued evolution. And a willingness to incorporate a lot of different weapons. And for as much as this offense is about Stefon Diggs and Josh Allen, they get so many other guys going that kind of puts a lot on defenses to account for a lot, because on any given play, they'll throw it to the fullback. They'll throw it to Diggs. There's so many different options for Josh Allen, and that's going to be a challenge for Baltimore to answer and really use the depth of their back seven to match up.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned fullbacks. This Patrick Ricard in Baltimore has been a big part of their offense for a while. The way they use him, and they use him in line, they motion him. He can catch the ball a little too out of the backfield and carry some guys with him. So I think that for the Ravens, they do have those players. Both defenses are going to have their hands very full with the playmakers that both offenses have in this game. But you'll want to stay tuned here for our final segment. We're going to be diving into our predictions and wrapping up with final thoughts about this game. So be sure to stay tuned. We still have a ton to talk about here on Locked On Ravens and Locked On Bills.
Folks, you don't want to be that guy. You don't want to be that guy that's going to propose. You're at the beach. You're on the pier. The next thing you know, you drop the ring and it's in the ocean. And you definitely don't want those videos all over the internet. And we know we see them all the time. Well, folks, you can prevent that. You can have some insurance. The guys over at BriteCo Jewelry Insurance will make sure that if that happens to you, you will get a replacement for the full value of that ring, no matter if it's lost, stolen, or you just can't figure out what happened to it. Go to brite.co/locked on. It's the fastest, easiest, and cheapest way to cover yourself with the best jewelry insurance in the business. The guys over at BriteCo are geniuses. They made buying insurance for your engagement ring, your watch, or whatever so easy. You can get covered in minutes on your cell phone, and you won't find a better deal on great coverage that's super affordable. Brite.co/locked on. We all hate insurance, right? The guys over at BriteCo turn the whole experience around, so it's probably the easiest thing you can do for yourself this week. There's no excuses. For $5 a month, you can get totally comprehensive coverage, and it won't take you more than 2 minutes on your cell phone. Check it out. Brite.co/locked on.
We're back. Our final segment, Locked On Ravens and Locked On Bills. Kevin Oesrtreicher still here with Joe Marino. And thank you so much again for making both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Bills your first listen of the day. But now be sure to make your second listen to the Peacock and Williamson NFL show. Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson give you the expert NFL analysis in less than 30 minutes. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And Joe, in a game like this between Baltimore and Buffalo, there are going to be some fireworks, explosiveness, and I think we could see both the offense and the defense for both sides make some plays. And I think having timely plays that could turn the tides one way or the other. When it comes to predictions, Joe, I'll throw this one to you first. I mean, how do you see this game going? Because it really could go either way.
Yeah, it's a tough game to predict. And so they make us do this. So we have to give predictions. So let me tell you my thoughts here on some of this game script and how I think things will go on Sunday. I have to start by saying that the Bills' loss to the Dolphins last week was pretty hard to reconcile. A lot like the Ravens lost to Miami. Trying to figure out what the hell happened, right? A game that you clearly had in your hands. And you go back to this Bills game against Miami. The Bills have 31 first downs to the Dolphins 15. The Bills have 497 total yards to the Dolphins 212. The Bills possessed the ball for 40 minutes. The Dolphins had it for 19. Bills ran 90 offensive plays. The Dolphins ran 39. The Bills only had one turnover. It's hard to reconcile that football game. And I think you're going to see a very spirited effort from this Bills team that has obviously big-time expectations for what they want to get done this year. And I go back since 2019 under Coach McDermott, and I think that's after Josh Allen's rookie season. This is when the Bills kind of became the Bills as we know them today. The Bills are 11-4 after a loss under Sean McDermott since 2019 with an average margin of victory of 11 points. And I like that they come into this game with a loss. You don't like that they lost the game last week. You would never choose that. But I think that's something that is a benefit to the Bills entering this contest. And I look at this Ravens defense, and they've struggled this year. And they've struggled against the Jets, Patriots, and Dolphins. They're giving up 26 points per game, giving up 458 yards per game, 358 passing yards per game to Joe Flacco, Mac Jones, and Tua Tagovailoa. Well, Josh Allen's coming to town, and this is a different type of quarterback talent that's this Ravens defense that has a lot to prove has to face. Can the Ravens play zone coverage? If they rely on man coverage in blitzing, that's going to be a great recipe for the Bills. They would love nothing more than to play man coverage into blitz. Lamar Jackson's the X factor, right? He's the guy that can turn this game upside down and really go against everything I just said. But I like what this Bills offense has against a Ravens defense that has a lot to prove. I like what the Bills have on defense stylistically, that they naturally don't have to reinvent how they play defense to go up against Baltimore. Again, Lamar Jackson's the X factor. I like the Bills coming into this game. Awful loss with what they have. I have it 31-26 Buffalo.
Yeah, I mean, I think for Baltimore, if they're going to have a chance to win this game, it's going to have to be about one, the adjustments they can make throughout the game if things aren't going well. I think that we've seen some good and some bad in that from both the offense and defense. I think offensively, I've been actually kind of impressed with Greg Roman and his adjustments so far. I think that a lot of people coming in the year and honestly going dating back a while now, Greg Roman's been one of the hottest topics in Baltimore about should he be the offensive coordinator? Is he good enough to lead an offense with Lamar Jackson? Well, look, I give him credit because while everybody thought, myself included, that this run game would be carrying this Ravens offense based off the personnel decisions they made in the offseason, it's been the pass game that's been putting the team on their back and carrying it. And we have seen the adjustments, for example, with Daniel Falele in the Patriots game. He struggled early on, gave up 2 early sacks to Dietrich Wise, wasn't getting out of his stance fluidly, and Wise was beating him on the edge. We saw adjustments by Roman to get him help. We saw adjustments throughout the game there. But then on the opposite side of things, you see some issues with Mike McDonald's defense early, where against the Patriots, a drive that really should have ended in no points for the Patriots. They have 43 yards. They go 43 yards in 30 seconds to get a field goal at the end of the half. They're getting gashed a little bit. And you're right. A team with Josh Allen, Stefon Diggs, it's not a team with, Mac Jones or with Tua or with even the Joe Flacco, who is still elite in Baltimore, by the way. But I do think that what you're looking at here is they're going to have to take advantage of a Bills secondary that, again, we don't know, right? We're talking here on Crossover Thursday, Joe. We don't know who's going to be available for Baltimore or Buffalo when it comes to Sunday at 1 p.m. So if Buffalo can get some guys back, that's a good omen for them. I still think this is going to be a very high-scoring game, and I agree in the fact that I do think Lamar Jackson is the X factor. And what we have seen from him so far, I personally think he has put himself at the forefront of an MVP conversation that includes Josh Allen and includes Jalen Hurts and Patrick Mahomes and some of those players. And if he can play like an MVP once again on Sunday, that could be the turning point for them. Usually in a close game, I do pick the Ravens because of the Justin Tucker effect, and that's where I go. But I'm going to pick the Bills in this one. I think it's a 34-30 Buffalo win in a game that don't get me wrong, I think Baltimore, there are plenty of avenues for them to win this game. But I think the Bills, and you talked about it, are 1 week ahead of where the Ravens were last week. So what I mean by that is the Ravens had that loss to Miami, kind of the what the heck just happened here? Mm-hmm. How did this happen? And they came out against New England. And again, I think they were motivated. They had that. Not that they're not going to be motivated for this game, but the Dolphins beat the Bills in week 3. And so it's like the Ravens had the week 2 to week 3 motivation. The Bills had that week 3 to week 4 motivation. I think Baltimore will get up for this game. I think they usually do against Buffalo, but I think the Bills do end up taking this one 34-30. Joe, do you have any final thoughts on this game? Any other X factors you have? Maybe one underrated player on the Bills Ravens fans should look out for?
Well, I think we see it similar. I will say that I didn't know that we would. And we know that the talent that Baltimore has on defense is good enough, right? Like, I know that those guys haven't played together this year. It's about getting guys back in that secondary, and they're certainly capable of playing so much better, right? And they've got players up front. They got speed on the second level. It just hasn't come together yet. It's going to happen at some point this year. Is it going to be week 4 against the Bills and this offense and all the points and yards that they're able to produce? I know that doesn't quite answer your question, but as I kind of lean into the Baltimore side and I try to find that script there's no script we have to talk about with Lamar Jackson and the offense. They're fully capable of scoring and scoring at will. It's, can the defense come together, right? And so far they just leave a lot of questions. And it's, again, some point it will. I think they're going to win the North. This might be a playoff rematch at some point. But early on, I just haven't seen it yet from the Ravens defense, and it doesn't sound like you have either.
Yeah, it's been, we've seen some miscommunications, a missed tackle here and there, definitely the gashing plays. And, you have a player like Justin Houston who, out of necessity, because of the Ravens being so injured at outside linebacker, having to play so many snaps, and what happens, he gets injured in week 3. Calais Campbell is playing too many snaps, and you have Michael Pierce go down. What's that going to look like? So look, I agree. I think the Ravens defense by the end of the year, Joe, if we're talking again in January, I think the conversation will be, look, they had the early season struggles, but they figured it out late, and they have too much. I mean, look, the safety room itself with Marcus Williams, Kyle Hamilton, Chuck Clark, and all those guys, the secondary, by that point, Marcus Peters would be fully back, at least I'd like to hope to believe, and also Marlon Humphrey and some of the other front 7 players. They do have that talent, but I do think they have to figure it out. They have to work Marcus Peters back in and get him back to feeling confident again. And I think he does look a lot more confident out there than he did in week 2 against Miami. He had that interception in week 3. But I think when you're talking about this defense, there are questions to be answered. Is Mike Macdonald going to be fully adjusted in week 4 to the NFL game? I don't think the answer is yes right now. I think when you're talking about later in the year, then I think the answer is going to be absolutely yes. We've seen a couple of growing pains with Mike Macdonald. Again, I think Baltimore can win this game. There are avenues to do it if they can shut down Josh Allen, which is very hard to do. It's like it's hard to shut down Lamar Jackson. 2 hard things to do. If they can take advantage of maybe a Bills secondary that is missing some players. You talked about Jordan Phillips a little bit. Maybe Ed Oliver doesn't suit up. I don't know. I think at the end of the day, though, Buffalo will win this game. And I think it will be the game of the week here, and I'm looking forward to it absolutely. But that's all we have here today on this crossover Thursday between Locked On Ravens and Locked On Bills. Joe, I really appreciate you hopping on here and talking with me. And I think, again, anytime we can see Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen battle, it's always a pleasure.
Yeah, I appreciate the great conversation, Kevin. I got a feeling we're going to talk again in January. And one other thing that we can unite over, no new injuries for either team coming out of this one. Everyone stay healthy.
Absolutely. No new injuries. We'll put that in the air, and hopefully it will come true. But again, thank you so much for listening to both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Bills on this crossover edition. When we get back in tomorrow, we'll be diving into more content with your respective shows, so be sure to stay tuned for that. We will see you right back here tomorrow.